Yeah, I mean, those are very interesting, like whiteboard discussions. Like you and I could get in a room, jump on a whiteboard, and we could talk about all sorts of crazy scenarios. And I'm sure we would learn some stuff and it'd be really fun. But if it's that complicated that you and I have to manage it day to day, it's not realistic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think for technologies sometimes on the bleeding edge, they have these capabilities that may well be required, usually by the Fortune 1000. But, most customers don't need it. Most requirements, genuine requirements, can be met with pretty simple solutions. The technologies are very mature, especially the VMware stuff. It's very mature these days. It's got a lot of capabilities. Use the ones you need. You don't have to use the latest feature just because it's out and it sounds good and the marketing's amazing. Like, just do what you need to do.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time, right? Like, don't upgrade to the new version because it has that new widget that's super shiny that you're like, oh, that'd be awesome to use. It's like, do you have a business need for it? Then if you don't, then don't worry about it. Like, if your business requirements changes and now suddenly you need that new shiny widget, well, then go consume it, right? But don't just put stuff out in the environment just because it looks cool. We're constantly after this shiny object thing, and this is the thing, like especially like Kubernetes. And where the industry is going with all of this, and everybody's like, everything has to be microservices, everything has to be containerized, it needs to be, you'd be able to deploy it to all these different clouds. I'm like, that sounds great on paper. Reality is most Fortune 1000s are not ready for that. If you're a startup, you're in the Bay Area, you're working out of somebody's garage with this great new idea, sure, use Kubernetes because you can probably go get 10 people by throwing a stone on the corner in the Bay Area that will know what Kubernetes is and can run it for you. But for the large Fortune 1000s, it's still in the infancy stage, I think, personally. Okay, I love it. But you go to like the conference, the CNCF conference for Kubernetes, and you go 1 year and it's 100 companies. You go the next year, 50 of those companies are gone and it's replaced by 50 others, right? And it's like, as an enterprise, how are you supposed to pick the winner right now, right? And we're just now starting to see some of these projects kind of go through that CNCF process where they actually graduate out of the incubation stage and they're, fully vetted, whether it's a company or just an open source technology, to where they're finally ready for like an enterprise to start adopting them. But it's such a changing landscape right now that for most enterprises, I think that slow and steady wins the race a lot of times for them. And
yeah, I think that's true even at the small scale. A small customer might not have the funds available to actually innovate that quickly. So they just need something that works.
Yep.
And it might not be the fastest or the most efficient or the fanciest, but as long as it just works, that's fine. And whether it's deployed in a container or a VM, if the outcome is achieved, this is a great outcome. So, let's not, go to tech wars like we did with iSCSI and NFS and Fiber Channel, right? Let's just get an outcome for customers. And if it's not the preference technology or it's not the coolest technology, it actually doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So taking off our tech hat sometimes and just putting on our business hat, as we do as enterprise architects, is something that I certainly didn't do in the early part of my career. I want the widget. Give me the widget.
Yep. Oh yeah.
I want to play with the widget. I want all the settings. And in fact, this is something we had at Nutanix. We had customers complain that there wasn't enough things they could tune. And I went, actually, I can understand that. That makes sense. I used to be that guy. And then I tried to explain, hey, why don't you do something better? Like, we're taking you away from all these buttons, which add very little value. And now you can step up your skill set. Maybe you go from an SRE to an architect, right? Or you go to become an application specialist or something new, because the infrastructure was becoming simpler. So, yeah, I think removing options is actually the biggest challenge, making something simple that just works. And for 95% of the time, if it's a default setting that works, that's a good default setting.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's been one of, I think, the biggest shifts right over the last probably 5 or 6 years, especially from the VMware side. Like, you're right, back in the day, everybody wanted to know what's every single advanced configuration setting that I can make inside of my vSphere environment. And I need to touch every one of those to make sure that this thing is just right for what I need, right? And we got to the point like where I think that was the thing that VCF tried to solve, and to a certain extent it probably has, but it's gotten rid of a lot of that, right? Like, a lot of those, you don't worry about it. Just for 90% of the companies out there, this thing will cover 90% of your use cases. And you probably only need to tweak it for 10%, right, of what you've got. And that's fine. You don't want to tweak it for the 90%. You want to only have to touch it for the 10%, because
Absolutely.
operationally that's going to make it much easier for you. And you look at like the public cloud providers, and like, I mean, back in the day, I mean, Amazon had like 4 options. What kind of EC2 instance did you get? You got one of like 4 things, and that was all. You didn't know what they were doing behind the scenes on any of those. But as soon as something comes on-prem or inside of a data center, people were suddenly like, oh, I have to touch like everything. It's like, well, you're not touching those things in EC2, so why do you care if you're not touching them in your data center, right? And it's a mentality thing. I think it's getting better, but you know, if it's a VM, it's a VM. And at this point, really, is there that much of a difference? I mean, not much.
Yeah, I think if you do like a TCO and you can show a measurable difference between containers and VMs, that's going to make a significant difference to, or not measurable, but a significant difference to a company, especially with Fortune 1000, I would be very surprised.
Yeah.
Because just that transition process, everyone talks about refactoring and things like that. Well, it's not just refactoring, it's reskilling, it's retooling, it's all the other pieces that come along with it. So if you're doing things well, things are running appropriately, you're familiar with virtualization and VMs, cool. Chuck it in a VM. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like, I would prefer to have a standard. I used to always say this. I like to design a standard platform for all workloads, and get as close to that as possible. And then anytime there's something that has to be bespoke, okay, fine. There's use cases for that sometimes, but I want everything to be standardized as much as possible. And yes, if I went through every different workload and built a bespoke environment, could I make it faster, better, whatever? Yeah, probably. But that's so much complexity when I can just get above the minimum requirements for everything on a standard platform. And that's the goal in my mind for architecture, is keep things simple, deliver an outcome that's for most things, most of the time. And the bespoke is for the edge cases, as opposed to, you know, Oracle love to run their stuff in an Oracle environment, and, you know, all these different bespoke environments. That to me is just cost, complexity, risk. Your tooling's completely different. Your backups might be different. Like, you just have just enormous amounts of compounding complexity, actually, is probably a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
Compounding financial returns are great, but compounding complexity is not. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where like I said, like full circle, like my operational background, where it comes in. It's like, could you do everything bespoke? Yeah, you could. Operationally, that's going to be a nightmare. Like, it's going to be, and sometimes it's hard to quantify the operational cost of things inside of an environment, right? But ultimately, it's like when you suddenly are like, well, why am I still running vSphere 5.5 out there, right? It's like, well, because I had this one bespoke thing that I built once upon a time that I haven't figured out how to get off of that bespoke thing to fit in my more general purpose thing, right? And it's that operational complexity, I think, that really hurts people and organizations so often. Because like you said, like if everything's bespoke, then you have to have, realistically, you've got to have a whole bunch of individuals who are good at one or two things that can't look at everything holistically. Whereas if you've built above, like you said, like above that minimum, where 90% of everything you do is underneath that watermark, then operationally you can have 10, 12, 15, however many people you need. They can all have the same skill set and be capable of managing the entirety of the infrastructure, the majority of the infrastructure. And then you only have to have that 10% be bespoke, right? And there's still, I mean, I still see it like lots of applications. They have some really, like if you work on like for a financial organization and you're doing like stock market trading stuff, like they have some very bespoke requirements that are very unique to their business, right? Like extremely low latency network connections. And now suddenly, yes, a vMotion happening at the wrong moment with the stun happening could have a significant impact to that kind of workload. But for the vast majority of every other Fortune 1000 company, like they're not worried about that, right? So that general design, that VCF, that reference architecture that a company comes out with will probably fit, the 90%, and you're just going to tweak it a little bit for your business. And
And I
But
say to
yeah,
customers all the time, I'm always going to design you a scalable and repeatable model. So here is the design. Here is how it scales. Here is how you can use it for different workloads if you have to. And here are its limits, but you can pretty much do everything you need with it.
yeah,
And I think that's the way, good architecture is done, is making sure that most things work, and yeah, that bespoke is minimized,
yeah.
because the cost of bespoke is crazy.
It is.
Especially when you have multiple of them. Like, you already have your standard platform. Let's say you and I have designed a standard platform for a customer. It works for 90% of things. All right, great. That cost whatever it cost. For that 10%, the cost is probably like double that again, right? Because it's so complex. So the fewer bespoke environments, the better from a cost perspective. And if we can measure what the requirement is and the outcome required from that bespoke infrastructure is, a lot of the time, if you think about it enough, you can actually put it in the standard environment, right? You might have it on a host, for example, that doesn't have much overcommitment. Sure, no worries, right? That's easy. But a completely dedicated environment, dedicated infrastructure and networking, all this stuff, very, very complicated. And are you getting a significantly better outcome than putting it on your standard platform? In most cases, I see that as no, right?
Yeah.
And there's exceptions to that rule, but in most cases, I've been mixing business critical apps with test dev, with server workloads for customers, especially ones who are cost constrained, for many years, right? And most of it works really well. If your infrastructure is designed pretty well, it's pretty efficient, it's not crazy overcommitted, it just works. Like, ESX as a hypervisor is extremely mature these days. Back in the day, I don't know if you ever did there was a whiteboard session that they ran talking about how oversubscription of CPU worked in the really early days.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and it was fantastic. And I still remember it. It had one of those hash marks, right? Or a tic-tac-toe board, whatever you want to call it. And they're like, you've got 4 VMs, and they're all 3 VMs, and they're 4 vCPU each. And okay, so CPU 1, CPU 2, CPU 3, CPU 4. Cool. The next VM, da 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 da. And there's only one slot left. Oh, well, that VM is in a ready state. It has to wait, right? Ready for when the other machine's not using CPU. And then, now this one can be scheduled. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I remember doing that for customers on the whiteboard all the time when virtualization was new, and talking about why you should right size. Because if they were all 3 vCPUs, they could all be running at the same time. So it was more efficient to have them smaller. And I think that resonated with customers. But now we don't have that constraint where the scheduling is so rigid, and it's extremely flexible.
I mean, you think about like when ESXi first came out versus today, right? Like processing power, the amount of processing power that are in even a single socket, where you're getting like 56 cores or whatever the crazy numbers are that like AMD's throwing out there now. And you're like, holy crap, like that's more computing power in one CPU socket than I had in probably 100 servers at the beginning of my career. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's like, yeah, like early on, you would hear people talk about like CPU wait times and being able to use ESX top and what's in ready states, what's in a wait state. And that was like your day to day as a systems administrator when you were using ESXi back then.
You only had like 4 cores,
yeah,
right? Or 8 cores or something.
Now, for the most part, like I can't remember the last time I had to tell a customer like, oh, you need to open up ESX top, and we need to look at all of the CPU wait times and stuff. It's like, no, like hardware has come along so much, and to your point, like the hypervisors that are out there today, ESXi, KVM, whatever Amazon uses, you don't even think about them anymore, right? Like I'm using it. Like it's a commodity at this point. I don't even think about it. Like I'm just using it. I mean, I had a boss at Adobe who thought that VMware should just give us the ESXi licenses for free, because that wasn't where the value was anymore. The value was in all of the stuff up the stack. And ESXi as the hypervisor was just the thing that got me to consume everything else that VMware would sell. I don't think VMware gave it to him for free, but I mean, it was his philosophy towards it. But yeah, I mean, just hardware today is insane, right? And what it's capable of doing. And yeah, and if you're being smart and you're not like overcommitting memory and CPU to, factors of 10 or whatever it is, you're probably going to be able to put just about anything on that environment, and it's going to run pretty nicely. Like you're not going to hit too many of those noisy neighbor situations like we used to 5-6 years ago anymore. So it makes our job easier because, like you said, it means from a design perspective that we can make I mean, honestly, like one design from the next that I've done over the last 5 years, there's not a lot of deviations between them. I mean, I could pretty much whiteboard anything you wanted. You could give me a scenario and I'm going to pretty much whiteboard the same 5 boxes because at this point, it's all pretty much just going to meet your needs, right? And then it's just what are your unique use cases that I'm going to maybe tweak 1 or 2 things here for you and for your environment.
I think the 80% is that scalable, repeatable model. And that's the other beauty of working. We both have worked in teams and currently work in teams of a bunch of VCDXs. So when we do a project, it's like, cool, I can reuse that for the next customer. So I don't have to charge them a full project, right? I've already got a piece that I've developed. Sure, they're going to pay a little bit for intellectual property or whatever, but they're not going to have to pay that whole piece of work. And we can customize to those unique requirements. So what I love doing is when I've documented design decisions, I used to share them on a blog actually, but I would actually go to a customer and say, hey, here's a few options I've done for customers. And here are the reasons we went down this path versus that path, side by side, just stick on a slide. And then you go, I think you are very close to decision A, but decision B had a good point. So let's factor that in. Let's make sure this is correct, validate it for your requirements, and then it's a sort of almost a copy paste. And that's what you get from really good architects as well, is even like when it's a bespoke environment, that person has already done 50 of those before. So they don't have to start from a blank sheet of paper, even though they can, you don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Very, very true. So, and that, I mean, I think that's a good thing. I think that the fact that we're not reinventing the wheel every time we do something anymore. I mean, we maybe were 6 or 8 years ago, but we're not anymore. I mean, there's enough reference architectures out there that I really think that any customer who has, a decent architect in their org could probably go out and get what they need, 50%, 75% of what they need just from the reference architectures out there without them having to start from a blank sheet of paper and building the whole thing up from the get-go.
Exactly. And just get the guidance from a good architect to get it from 70% to 100.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously that 30% or 20%, whatever it is the complex part, and it still costs money. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the bulk of it's there, and it's just about adapting that to that customer and making sure the organization, so the enterprise architecture level, is actually done as well. And we're not just looking at day one. Excuse me. We're looking at, day 365. And to your point, 5 years from now, what's it going to look like? And how are we going to migrate from what we're designing today to the next thing and the next thing after that?
Yeah. And like you said, I think the thing for you and I and others who have their VCDX, especially a lot of the early on ones, we did have to do a blank sheet of paper, right? Like we did have to start with it because, I mean, there were no good documented integration points for all of the different VMware products when they were acquiring companies faster than people go through toilet paper, right? I mean, like there's just so much changing, 8-10 years ago. But now, I mean, like if you were a brand new architect coming out of college or, an SRE with a few years of experience and you're taking your first solutions architecture job, like there's a lot of material out there that you can just consume from others and learn from. And I think then the advice for those individuals is don't just copy the work that somebody else has done. Spend the time understanding why they did what they did, right? So that you can internalize it and then be able to solve the 30% case for those customers or those organizations you work for. So
yeah, absolutely. And that blank sheet of paper, it reminded me immediately with fond memories about my VCDX design. That was literally a blank sheet of paper. I looked back at it the other day, actually. I was looking through stuff and I found it, but and I was like, this is not really to the standard I would do today, but that's because we evolve over time as well, right? So, VCDX is a level, and I'm hoping that I'm significantly above that minimum bar today with that continuous learning we talked about. But I can't recommend enough. And all the boot camps I've run on architecture over the years, I always recommend people do a design from a blank sheet of paper as an exercise to see where they're at. Because if it's a blank sheet of paper, you very quickly realize, oh, I don't know what to do here. And then you're not just reading through a template going, oh, yeah, we'll do that, we'll do that, we'll do that. A blank sheet makes you think, what do I have to write next? What is the next heading? Right? What is the next topic I need to cover? And it's extremely valuable. And then, yes, you're going to grab from other sources and copy paste stuff in, whatever, but just building it out yourself and putting it into your own company's template or whatever, I think is extremely valuable. And for any employers out there or bosses or managers, whatever, give your staff the time to do that, every now and again. It's so valuable from a learning experience. And it comes back to your point about mentoring. If my team came to me and said, hey, I need to spend 2 days just researching this before we go speak to a customer, right? My reaction to that is great, awesome. Just
go do it.
I don't know why you asked, right? But some people would go, no, we need to have the meeting today. Well, not really, because the meeting's not going to be super productive. We're going to get everyone in a room and we're going to have to go away and find stuff out. Better to prepare and do it properly and invest a little bit of time up front than rush things. So, yeah, what is it? Prior preparation prevents poor performance.
Yeah.
There's some less polite versions of that as well. But I really believe that. Like, just prepare and life's a lot easier. Internet connectivity challenges aside. We talked about a lot of cool stuff, but one thing I wanted to give you the chance to do is just let everyone know about your YouTube channel, which is growing and developing really well. So I thought I'd give you the floor for a moment to talk about that.
Yeah. So, one of the things, I've been a blogger for like 10 years, right? Like in various forms. And I still have a blog, virtualelephant.com. But I wanted to get more into like the YouTube side of it. Like my thing has always been, it's not just about understanding that there's this technology or this piece of software that you can use. It's how do I operationalize it, right? And so that's really where my blog started early on with like Hadoop and stuff, and it's morphed over the years. But that's where the YouTube channel's at now, which is really, I do talk about enterprise architecture stuff. So like what we've been talking about today, I have videos on that kind of stuff. And like we talked early on, like the chart, like how do you make a design decision? And a lot of the stuff that we talked about there, I have a video on that. But the other side of it is really around Kubernetes. Like I said, I'm kind of addicted to it right now. Because like I said, there's so much changing in that space that it's hard for anybody, whether you're an SRE, a solutions architect, an enterprise architect, to know like, what should I actually do? How should I actually consume this new piece of technology into our environments? Will it actually help us? Won't it help us? And the thing that I've gotten most frustrated about over the last 2 years with Kubernetes is that you'll go to like, there'll be the new project out there and you'll go like read their documentation. They're like, okay, here's how you install it. And they're telling you how to install it on a laptop as a developer. They're not actually telling you how to adopt their technology in a data center, right? Because those are two drastically different things. And so many times they'll be like, yeah, we have this great UI for this thing. And all you have to do is open a port on your local machine to that container address that you've got on your laptop. And I'm like, that's great if that's what I'm doing. But no, how am I going to run this thing in a data center, right? And how am I going to do ingress into a data center to be able to look at your UI no matter where I am in the world at any given time, right? So that's really what the channel's about, is enterprise architecture and a lot of the Kubernetes stuff, and showing you how to take a piece of technology and actually be able to figure out how it would work in a data center. Whether you should or not, I don't make those kind of assumptions for anybody, but that's what I like talking about. It's what I'm passionate about. So some of the videos are better than others, like the podcast thing, like kind of learn. I've never done it before. You kind of learn as you go. Certainly my office, I've redesigned it this year specifically for recording and the microphone and everything like that. Like we're all tech geeks, so you got to have the latest and greatest for some of this stuff. Yeah, so, but
absolutely.
But yeah, that's what the YouTube channel is about.
Done a great job. So kudos to you.
Thanks. Thank you.
That I really wanted to highlight, which is, you've got a company which is developing a solution, and to your point, they're giving you documentation that talks about how to install it on a laptop and manage it as one individual. And I think there's a huge gap in the market across pretty much every vendor. When they're creating a product or a solution or an offering, um, they don't have someone like an enterprise architect thinking about how it's going to be used or how it should be productized for the enterprise. And then they also don't have a solution architect thinking about what's the best way for us to design the product to make it easy to implement and scale and things like that. And one of the things I really championed at Nutanix was when you have a principal product manager, you should have a peer who is a principal architect so that they can merge together and actually come up with these things as a team. And the principal product manager shouldn't be overruling the architect or vice versa. They should be a team who make decisions together. And then, you might have a junior architect with a junior product manager, a product that's maybe, less important or whatever. But I think that skill set of product manager, product marketing managers as well, and architects, they should all be aligned. And I don't really see that in the industry. Yes, architects contribute and give advice and guidance to principal product managers, but very rarely do I see an organizational structure or a company that understands this. And it baffles me because there's so many smarter people out there than me. If I've worked this out, like what does that say about large companies and how inefficient they can be? So, I think for Kubernetes or any other innovative technology, you have really smart developers who can write code, which is amazing. They're far better at it than I am. So, but we each have complementary skill sets. So if someone's an amazing developer and I'm a good architect, let's get together and make sure there's that crossover in the middle where we're doing things which are good for both perspectives. So to your point, I was almost laughing when you said that. I'm like, I know exactly where that's come from. There's a product manager who is an engineer and that's their skill set, and they've never been guided or mentored by an architect. And that's the result you get.
Yeah. And everybody, like you said, it's almost like two sides of the same coin, right? And pairing them together. And I've joked about this on Twitter. I'm like, if I read another piece of documentation where somebody tells me to open a port on my local machine to access your new really fancy widget or whatever the hell it is, like, get out of here. Like, you are not ready for the enterprise. Like, that's like your side project that you're working on the side. I get so aggravated by it. And that's why, that's where that's just, it aggravates the hell out of me. Like, oh my gosh, like you want to sell this into a Fortune 1000 company, that cannot be your documentation for them. Like it can't be. And it can't be the documentation that you're going to go in and show their enterprise architect or their solutions architect for how they're going to put this in the cloud, in the data center to run as a service that's going to support their entire business. It's just like, you guys are killing me with this. So
absolutely. And I think that's where a product or a company like a startup can fall over as well, is they have a great solution. They just don't know how to communicate it to their target audience. And their target audience is rarely a developer. Right.
Yeah.
And this is one thing I saw at Nutanix a lot. In the early days, the success came from the vSphere administrator. Hey, I'm sick of my SAN. It's just driving me crazy. Can you help me solve this problem? Yes, we can. Boom. There we go. But then over time, it very quickly became an executive level decision. And that's probably where most of my time was spent, was dealing with C-level executives or senior members of a company, talking to them about the business side. And then, yes, I'll talk about the advantages of a technical solution or a product, but it's mostly talking about how the organization can benefit. And again, that's enterprise architecture. That's not even talking about the product. So I think if people can just learn a bit about the value of enterprise architecture and then understand there's a difference between that and solution architecture, and there's another big gap between that and an engineering side. And if you can get someone who knows a reasonable amount at each level, just listen to them. They're pretty good. They'll be valuable to you. They'll make you better. So I always say that to people. My goal is to make you better, whether it's an internal colleague as a product manager or whether it's one of my team. I want to make you better, and I would love it if you could make me better too. Right? It's a much harder task to make me better, but we can see how we go.
Yeah. So But yeah, I mean, like I said, my thing too, and I think you're the same way. You've been active on Twitter for years and years, right? I mean, it's just the YouTube channel, the blog, whatever it is. I mean, the V community is amazing, just in and of itself, right? Been a
Yeah,
huge
absolutely.
boon for me personally, and this is just kind of how I'm trying to give back. Like I said, I'm super passionate about that. To your point, and the reason you started your company, right? You recognize that there's a gap in the market, there's a gap in organizations for what we do, and you're tackling it from like the business perspective. I'm like, well, what can I do just to evangelize it from a YouTube perspective, right? And get more people to see this kind of content and be thinking about it differently. So
Yeah, to your point though, the V community is incredibly valuable. So, it doesn't have to be a company doing it. It can be an individual just presented a VMUG, right? Write a blog, do a YouTube video, do whatever. Like all those pieces of content are very valuable. But for me personally, when I started doing that, very probably 2010 or something, I started doing VMUGs and tweeting and stuff like that. I just found it made me so much better. So even if you're doing it selfishly just to make yourself better, and the byproduct is everyone else benefits from your content, like it's valuable. So yeah, I can't recommend it enough. And the funniest thing is, like, I remember I've had over the years, I've written hundreds of blogs, so probably 1,000 or something, but every now and again you get an email or a tweet or a DM or something from someone correcting you. Oh, you made a mistake. There's a typo. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I forgot to hit spell check. Cool. Fixed. And sometimes you're just wrong. You make a mistake, right? You misinterpret something and someone corrects you. Guess what? That's not embarrassing. That's great. Someone's helped me learn something. They've done it for free out of their own goodwill. They've reached out and helped you. You can update the article. If you're embarrassed that you made a mistake, just update it and don't tell anyone. Or what I like to do is just put a line through it and then write the correct thing there, because it's almost a reminder to me, hey, that was a mistake. Someone else can read through it and see the mistake I've made, and then they can learn from that as well. So mistakes we learn from, being right, we learn a lot more from a mistake than we do from being right. So let's make some mistakes and learn some stuff.
Yep,
Not on the
100%. Yeah.
side.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, like I said, just so many opportunities to give back. And, like you said, like part of the YouTube thing for me is like talking on camera, especially because of the pandemic, right? Like having to suddenly be on camera is very different than being in a room with a customer and a whiteboard. Right. And like, so for me, part of this has been like, it's a soft skill. Like I need to get better at my presentation skills. What if things never went back to us being in front of customers or us going to a big conference and standing in a hall, right, with 300 people? How do I have to change, my delivery and all of that? And so some of it is, yeah, like you said, like selfishly, like it's me just improving myself, and you put it out there and you hope people like it. And if they don't, well, they can keep their opinions to themselves. So
Yeah, it doesn't matter, right? We're not here to make everyone happy. We're here to try and help. And if someone doesn't appreciate it, they don't have to watch. But yeah, to your point about like the pandemic, one thing I really missed was whiteboarding, because I've always loved whiteboarding. And I was like, oh, how do I whiteboard? And all the virtual whiteboards are all crap, to be honest. I didn't find any that I was really happy with. But just recently for end to end, I bought a light board. So now I can actually do presentations on the light board in real time, and the quality is exceptional, and it's a really good in-person experience. So that's some of the things my customers benefit from is everyone in the company is going to have a light board, every VCDX level architect. So in my company, it's a senior architect, a principal, and a chief architect. So anyone who's principal above gets shipped a light board. So basically the light board, the idea is, and it's sort of a self-contained unit. It's quite easy to set up and use. It's a 50-inch screen. It's it's a good size, but it's not too big. And the idea there is that we can jump on a call very quickly and help a customer with something. So for those customers who pay us a retainer just to help them whenever they need it and ad hoc and things like that, we can just jump on a whiteboard. It doesn't matter where we are in the world, and we can give them that outcome very quickly. It's a high quality presentation. It's fun to do. Like I really enjoy them. And I'm looking forward to putting out some content on the whiteboard because, yeah, it's just a fun way to present. It's better than filming a whiteboard and having your back turned, like, and doing this. Like, it looks terrible. This one, the camera is actually looking through the screen. So as I write, as you know how whiteboards work, right? It's just a much better experience, and that's why I have this dark background behind me.
Yeah,
Um,
that's good.
so
No, I
it's
mean,
very,
that's like on my list for like one of the next things. Like, I got to get a couple other things sorted, but that's on my list because, like you said, like the not being able to whiteboard was probably one of the most difficult things during the pandemic. The way I solved it was an iPad. I saw the way Paul McSherry was doing it actually right before
mm,
everything shut down, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I got I got a iPad with a pen, and then I just used one of their whiteboarding, things, and then I would just share like an additional screen
mm,
over the Zoom or whatever, and that was how I did it. It wasn't perfect. I mean, but it worked good enough, at least, for it. I think the thing that I still struggle with, like kind of work, like doing digital workshops over video, and is that I miss being in the room, right? Because when we're all at the computer, most people nowadays, they don't even turn the camera on, right? So I might be the only one with the camera on. And so you can't read the room. You can't see, like, is this person understanding what I'm talking about? Do I need to like slow down or go back to this other thing? Or are they just totally zoned out altogether and not paying attention whatsoever to what I'm talking about? So
mm.
it's that kind of like, being able to read the room and the engagement, that you get when you're in a room is still difficult to replicate
Important one as
over Zoom.
well. And that's one of the reasons, probably same for you, is why I invested in good quality audio and headsets. And my camera is actually broken, so I'm on a 1080p instead of a 4K. But as you can tell, a bit blurry. It's not just my bad skin. So, but yeah, like I think the lighting as well, just all these components really help give a good experience. And yeah, it's amazing the audio quality difference on this gear compared to just an AirPod or just a normal mic. So
Yeah.
hopefully, if the audio is good and the video is good, you engage with people better. And to me, I think the working from home has been something I've done ever since I was at IBM. So the pandemic wasn't really a change for me. I've always championed that I would prefer to be able to be accessible more flexibly than be in a car driving for a certain amount of time, right, on a phone, bad audio, whatever. I would prefer to actually hire a person who has the skills, even if they're in a remote country location. One of my team members, Melissa Palmer's in the US, and actually that's a huge advantage, even though the company's focus, not primarily, but at least significantly for the moment, is APJ. Melissa can still get on calls. There's still overlap with time zones. She can still provide all the value she does, but also she's in the opposite time zone. So out of hours work, change management, any work that I would have to do at 2 in the morning, she can just do during her business day. So that's really convenient for us. It's the
Yeah.
same level of resource, and the customer doesn't have to get charged out of hours because Melissa's not working out of hours. So
Right.
it's actually a win-win. So this global scale is important, and global scale only works when we can have this interaction. Like if your
Yeah.
camera wasn't on right now, even though we've talked before, like it would not be the same. Like I can see you, you're smiling, you're happy, you're nodding, you're interacting, you're
Yep.
not falling asleep, or you're not. This is my favorite one, right, on your phone,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So it's important. And I remember at the start of the pandemic, people, were reluctant to put their cameras on, and then they got used to it. Then companies tried to mandate it and force people. But to me, it's just a better experience seeing people's faces. So I prefer just to do it for that reason.
Yeah, me too. Like you said, like I've worked from home off and on for 2 decades, right? So like when the pandemic happened, like all of my travel stopped, but like my day to day didn't really necessarily. Whereas for a lot of people, it did. Like they had never worked from home before. They didn't know how to manage their time and set boundaries around, hey, this is when my workday starts. I am going to take a break. Here's when my workday is going to end. And I'm actually going to shut off my email maybe, or, stop paying attention to it. So I think it was a huge learning curve for a lot of people. Like I said, for me, it was mostly just figuring out how to try to duplicate that in-person experience, over Zoom or over Teams or whatever it is. But yeah, certainly, I think we've all learned, I think we've all learned a lot over the last 2 years. I think me personally, it's made me a better not maybe necessarily a better architect, but a better presenter, right? You know, like the soft skills side of it. Even now that I am back to traveling a fair amount, right, and being in front of customers inside of a room, it just makes you appreciate it more, I guess, a little bit too. So
Yeah, it does. For me, I think it's very important to meet a person in person as early as possible in an engagement. So ideally, where possible, I want my team to go and visit the customer. Like if obviously if the engagement's very small, it's probably not necessarily possible if we're just providing a bit of guidance. But if it's a reasonable engagement, even if the customer's not paying for the travel, I think it's worth the investment from a company perspective. Get them on a plane, meet the customer, build some rapport, go out for dinner, just meet that person as a human, and don't talk about work for the whole time. Just meet them. And once you've shaken that hand and you know the person, you've built some rapport, then all this remote stuff becomes really easy. And
yes,
it
oh yeah,
just breaks down those boundaries. And I think in business, it is still a personal relationship with a person. Like, we are humans after all. So, yes, there's a business side, but also we should be able to switch off that business and have a break. And when we take customers, like, very common, obviously, vendors always and partners take customers out for dinners and drinks and whatever. Let's not talk too much about work in those times. Let's just be human beings. And, we don't have to
yeah.
be friends, but it'd be great if we could be, pretty friendly with each other and break away from work occasionally.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer, Josh, of the best way to get to know somebody, whether you're trying to get to know them to become like a business relationship or a personal relationship, is share a meal together. You know, when you're at a table sharing a meal with somebody, like, that is the easiest way to build a relationship with somebody. And that's one of those soft skills that I think a lot of people don't put emphasis on, but that they need to, is that in order for you and I to be successful, we can be the most technically competent architect that ever existed in the history of the world. But if we can't establish a personal relationship with our customers and we can't become that trusted advisor to them, it doesn't matter how good we are technically, we're never going to get anywhere with them and helping them be successful. And sharing a meal, as simple as it sounds, is one of the easiest ways to start to build that kind of relationship with them. And to your point, like, don't even talk about what the project is about or what the business is about. Just go figure out, who they are as an individual. And it goes in an enormous way. And I think that's one of the things that I love it. I mean, I love doing that. Who doesn't like eating too, right? But
Eating's good.
yeah, especially when somebody else is paying for it, right? With an
Even
expense
better.
account, even better. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a great way to be able to be successful in our roles. Is to share a meal with somebody and get to know them. And it's interesting, actually. I was just traveling a couple weeks ago in Dallas, and there was a solutions architect at the customer that I've been working with. I got to know him over the pandemic when they had a problem, and I got pulled into an engagement. And we've been on weekly meetings for more than a year. Every Friday morning, this person's on a call with me, and I finally got to meet him in person. 2 weeks ago, we went out for barbecue. I just said, "Hey, I'm in town. Where do you want? Let's just go grab some food." Right? Like, and it was such a great experience to be able to be like, "Holy crap!" After 2 years, Drew, it's great to meet you in person finally. Type thing, and
Yeah,
be able to
fantastic.
just take that relationship to the next level. So there's a lot to be said for in person, and I commend you for making that a priority for your group, especially early on in engagement, because I think that'll benefit you so much in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's a win-win. It's going to it's going to benefit the business, but it's also going to benefit my staff. It's going to benefit the customer. It's just good all round, and I really don't see any downside to that. Like, the worst case scenario is you have a resource and a customer who don't get along. Great, that's why you have a team, right? You send someone else in, right? No big deal. Like, that would be the worst case scenario if two individuals, just for whatever reason, they were not compatible. You know, cool, we'll send someone else, no problems. But getting to know someone is really good. And I think also, if there is a difference where people maybe not super compatible, they wouldn't be friends outside of work, they can actually be the best team at work. I've worked with people before, and I didn't like them as people, but they were brilliant at their job. So I sought them out to work with them because I really wanted that outcome. But would I have a meal with them? Sometimes no. Like, but that's okay as well. Like, I'm not
It
perfect. I'm
is.
sure plenty of people wouldn't want to have a meal with me as well. But, I think I would still help them regardless.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So, but like I said, I think I love what I do. I mean, I think that's the thing is no matter what you do, you've got to be passionate about it, whether you want to be an architect or an SRE or a project manager or a program manager, whatever it is, you just got to be passionate about it. Because if you're going to do something for year after year after year, you better enjoy doing it. Otherwise, why are you doing it? And go find
Yeah,
something
you're not getting the
else.
VCDX without a bit of passion, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, there's so much work involved. We tell people this all the time. I'm telling Lucho, who he better listen to this podcast and get his VCDX in the fall. But you're going to spend hundreds of hours preparing yourself. Now, whether that's hundreds of hours actually writing documentation, maybe not, but you're going to spend hundreds of hours skilling yourself up and being ready for it, talking to other people, figuring out where your gaps are. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I think that so often, I mean, I have 6 kids. Okay. So like I have 2 in college and I've got 4 at home still. And my thing about this generation is that when you and I were growing up, computers were new, right? Like when I was in high school is when I first started building computers from scratch. My dad worked for a semiconductor business at the time, and he brought home a 486 motherboard and chip and the memory, and I had to figure out how to put it all together. And we see jokes on Twitter all the time about IRQ settings and all of that stuff. I had to do all that, right? You probably did too, right? Like
Absolutely.
you've been around long enough, right? Like there was so much early on in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s into the early 2000s that we just had to figure out because there was no documentation for how to make something work. Like you wanted to compile the Linux kernel. Well, you were going to fail 50 times before you got that one successful one. Right. But nowadays kids, they just have the phone, right? And they just pick up the phone and they're like, oh, I want the new app. Let me just download the app. They have no idea how any of that works behind the scenes. Right.
Yeah.
They're just so used to this, everything coming
and a
easy.
disadvantage because the access to information is so enormous, but also it's easier. So sometimes I feel like to get good at something, you have to take the hard road. And I think these days, that's it's difficult. And I've only got one daughter, so she's 12. But I always tell her like it's okay to take the hard road. Right? Yes, you could figure it out. You could YouTube something, work it out very quickly. Someone will tell you the answer. And that's a good skill to be able to source information in a timely manner. But I'd also like you to think through a process and fail. And she's got those Lego robots you build and they drive around with sensors and stuff. So I said to her, look, if you're really stuck, go on YouTube. There'll be a tutorial on exactly what you're trying to do for sure. But I would like you to try and fail a half a dozen times before you reach out to that, because the learning process is the most important piece, not the answer. So, that frustrates the hell out of her for sure. And when she has a school project and she asks me my opinion and she presents it to me, I go all VCDX on her. But, I think she's quality work for that. And yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's just the thing is that the VCDX certification, the NPX, the TOGAF, whatever it is, it's going to require work on an individual's part, but it's worth the effort. That's what I tell people. It's worth the effort. It's worth the investment of your time. It's worth the pain, the time away from your family, probably when you're preparing for it and everybody's angry at you that you're spending all these hours working, but it's worth it in the end. And to your point, like my oldest son is 19. He was a freshman in college. He's studying mechanical engineering. And once he put himself on that path and I would give him problems to do, like, hey, go take that playground apart because I need to move it. Right. Or like, and he'd be like, well, how do I do it? I'm like, I don't know. Go figure it out. Like, you want to be an engineer. That's what an engineer is. An engineer figures out how to break stuff and how to put stuff back together. Right. And you just got to spend the time. And, this generation, sometimes that's not what they're willing to do all the time. And I'm like, you just got to get over it. You got to do hard stuff.
Me still is people say, oh, we're not going to do VCDX because it's too hard, right? Or we're not going to do MPX because it's too hard. Or, you don't have to be that good to do the job. No, you do have to be that good to do the job, actually. It's just that most people do the job badly. Like that, I mean, the challenge, the reason it's hard is because it's valuable. And actually, probably about 7 years ago, I felt like I'd plateaued a little bit. I wasn't challenging myself enough, and I needed to challenge myself professionally and personally. So I started jiu-jitsu, and I had no idea what jiu-jitsu was 7 years ago. I was just like, people told me it was really hard, and they told me other martial arts were, fairly useless these days, and they were more, carters, and it looked good, but effectiveness might have been less so. And I thought, oh, I'll try this jiu-jitsu thing. Apparently, it's really hard, and boy, is that hard! Like, I don't know if you ever tried jiu-jitsu, but
I have, yeah.
yeah,
It's
it's
not
tough.
easy.
And but the thing I like about it is hard, and I've been doing it for 7 years, and I still suck, right? And there's still an enormous amount to learn, and my coach still toys with me like I'm a 2-year-old, and I can't do anything about it. But every day I go to a class, or every time I have a one-on-one, I learn something new. And to me, it's just like the VCDX methodology. I'm applying a methodology, and I'm just learning new ways to go about it. And that challenged me physically and mentally in my personal life. And I was like, cool, that really got me some motivation. And then that translated into the career as well. So I think doing something challenging in either part of life, work or pleasure, benefits the other side as well. So, if I'm stuck on a problem, or there's a project that's annoying me or something, and I go do a jiu-jitsu class, and then I come back, 9 times out of 10, I've solved that problem really quickly, because I've hit the reset button, and I've come back a better version of me, and then I'm able to to succeed. So actually, you mentioned Paul earlier. So Paul does jiu-jitsu as well.
Oh yeah.
So I should have him on the podcast as well, and hopefully he's at Explore, and yeah, we can catch up and do some jiu-jitsu.
There you go. I know that he travels whenever he goes. He tries to find a place. So he and I have talked. I did karate for a while back in the day, and he and I have talked about it. And you're right. I mean, it's just another way to push yourself. Do something hard. You're gonna go into a dojo. You're gonna get on the mat, and it doesn't matter who you are. There's somebody better there, right? And at the same time that you're looking at that person is like, oh, I'm never going to get to that level. Somebody else is looking at you like, oh, I'm never going to get to that level. And the reality is yes, we all can. It just takes time and effort. And that's why, like, if you're doing the VCDX and you fail, that's okay. Okay. Like, if you fail, learn. I failed the first time, learn from it. I learned a ton from failing that first time. I went in that room with Mustafa was in there. And if you know him, he's like the storage guy. He's that rock star. And he started asking me some story. And I was just like, I had no idea. No idea. Like, and I came out of that being like, you feel extremely defeated in the moment, but then afterwards, you pick yourself up, and you're like you pick yourself up after you get like whooped on the mat. Right. And you're like, okay, I'm going to do this again, and I'm going to do it a little bit better than the last time. Right. And it's the same with the VCDX and doing difficult things. Like, it's okay to fail. I tell my kids, you've probably told your daughter, it's okay to fail. What's not okay is giving up. If you fail, that's fine.
My daughter does jiu-jitsu as well for that reason. Because
that's even better.
First of all, I think it's great for self-defense and confidence and health and all this other stuff as well. But, she's got to pick herself up on a bad day. She's been to school. She might be tired. Cool. Go to jiu-jitsu. And then, someone's pushing her face into the mat and, whatever, pulling her hair or something, like, okay, cool. Pick yourself up. Go again. Don't let that person, put you on your back. Make sure you stay in your proper posture and defensive and things like this. And, it teaches them a lot. And I think she's sort of done it a bit on and off. I'd like her to be more consistent, but it does teach you resiliency as a person as well. So it's not just about being able to defend yourself or compete in the sport or whatever. It's just that thought process and confidence, and it translates across everything in life, I think.
Yeah, 100%. So, like I said, it's as with everything. I think it kind of sums up what we've been talking about. But we have to do hard things. There's always going to be something difficult for us to take on. For organizations, it's recognizing that, hey, I do have this gap. Maybe I don't have an enterprise architect who's capable of having that holistic view for me to be successful or to transform my organization or whatever it might be. So I need to go find end to end, right? And they can help me with it. Or, hey, I need to partner like what I do, which is like, hey, VMware's already here. Let me partner with them more. And we'll get a person like Chris to come in or Simon to come in and help us with whatever it is that we're working on to get better, right? It's recognizing that there's always going to be something more difficult to take on. The work's never over. There's always going to be a need for one of us, I think, at this point. And you have to love doing it. And as long as you do, I think all of us, I think that's the other thing too. Like, you look at all of the VCDXs. John is a great example. Like, he's been super successful in his career. He's number one, right? Duncan, you look at Duncan, what he did. He was one of the first 7 and where he's at today, right? And you see how the trajectory of his career has changed over time. But we all have that core foundational mentality, framework behind everything that we do, that we can all, be in a room together and have a conversation. Anybody can walk up to John at Explore or VMworld and be like, and he's going to probably know who you are, at least have heard of you probably. And you can start having a conversation, and, we have so much to learn from each other. So, like, thanks Absolutely. For the chance to be here today. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I was just looking, we've been talking for 2 hours minus the podcast break we had, but it's been a great chat, and I've got a bunch of meetings to go to, actually, so I'll have to wrap it up. But this has been a great chat. Appreciate your time. Look forward to catching up at Explore. This podcast should be released just before then.
Awesome.
So looking forward to getting some feedback, and we can laugh about it at Explore.
That'd be great, Josh. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks for your time again.
All right. Take care.